We've seen how great some units are when they're capable of hitting multiple weaknesses in a single move. Audio piercing dark, Sasantos hitting fire and light, and in the distant future, other meta units like Gaine hit light and Parties hits fire, lightning and dark. They allow you to have one unit to be good not only on one weakness type, but also on the other weaknesses, and this becomes way more imminent with implants, mainly with Tiziano allowing Gaine to be used on comps outside of dagger and light. This video is mainly focused not only on the advantages, but also on the weaknesses of these kind of gimmicks, on the disadvantages that these comps have to face when fighting and what this means for you. For global, our current meta goes around Audio, Sasantos, and Elrica as our DPS units. This means that we can use any combination of these units to cover either Sword, Dark and Light. On the Adversary log, we can basically cover 52 of the 61 fights that are there right now, practically 85% of the entire Adversary log, although some of those fights aren't 100% doable with only swords. This is accounting for example Barking, which he and his tactical researcher have sword weaknesses, but the Scheming Dancer doesn't have a weakness we can pierce with Audio, Sasantos or Elrica. But outside of the Adversary log, we can also use them in Elite Tower fights. Audio is always piercing a weakness against the Red Wolf and the Skywing, and we can use him for the first 60% of the fight against the Kraken and the final 60% of the fight against the Flesh Eating Plant. But the real weakness that comes from piercing weaknesses is shield shaving. This problem is not as apparent as it seems though, as it only tends to affect the support characters. Not only are Sasantos and Audio more than capable enough to handle shield shaving by themselves, but the amount of matchups where either Sasantos or Solon are incapable of breaking the enemy are scarce. Solon is able to be the breaker in 23 of those fights, and Sasantos is able to be the breaker in 21 of those, meaning that only Hermine Huntress, Gimel the Brigand Leader, Judah the Believer, both Oshka fights, Foran Emissary, Simurgh, and Glossom are the only enemies that we can't break with either of them. But this is not bad news because we have a lot of options to use for those fights. Mainly Ditraina, Ogen, Sonia, and even Elrica or Audio are able to flex their spot. That isn't really bad at first glance, but when we start to use implants to rely on damage, then things are different. Implants are a new mechanic where we're able to implant up to 9 times a weakness type into the enemy. Not only that, but if the enemy already has that weakness, it increases the damage they take by 20%. When you first hear this mechanic, it sounds broken, but the more you analyze it, the more apparent its weaknesses are. Implants basically force you to only bring 1 DPS of that damage type. This is because if you try to bring 2 DPS characters, one of them is going to remove the implants, meaning that not only do you have to jig above one character to make the most out of the implants, but you also have to depend on someone else to shape shields. Every time you use this strategy, you have to rely on Tiziano to reapply the implants whenever you want to deal damage with Gaine, which is unideal because you're spending an extra action to enable your DPS character. The thing is that these problems are not as apparent as they seem because of how strong Gaine hits. Enemies don't have enough HP these days. Usually most fights are done in one break, which minimizes the reliance of having to constantly apply implants, especially if you are free to play because not having Tiziano's A4 is a big hindrance. There's also the thing that right now there's a possibility of running Parties alongside Gaine and Tiziano. Parties has enough potency up to be able to hit Cap without a lot of help anyways, and he's able to pierce 6 weaknesses, so it's already rare to find a fight where he's unable to hit a weakness, which isn't even that big of a deal because he will probably hit Cap anyways with how strong he hits. This also solves another issue that implants have: buffs. If you want to bring 2 DPS characters that don't share the same weapon type, then you have to bring more generalized buffs. The reality of this is that your damage is not distributed evenly between the 2 DPSs. Most of the time, one of them is going to output more damage than the other, so it's better to just focus on building more damage for your main damage dealer. But Parties is self-sufficient enough to not need help from someone else to hit Cap, so basically you can run the 3 of them and not be hindered much by doing so. So, at the end of the day, while I do think that implants are probably overrated sometimes, I actually do find them quite balanced. It is just a bad coincidence that the meta was unable to keep up with its flaws. Piercing weaknesses is also quite strong, but I admit I actually like the part when you have to use 2 different kind of DPS units like bow plus dark comps, but it is a shame that Parties now trivializes this part. I hope that you enjoyed the video and have a good day.